Universalist Fellowship of Pottstown. This morning, after a holiday that reminds us to be grateful for the gifts we've been given, we are once again reminded of the blessings of care and community that allow us to gather here safely, and those of technology that allow us to be together in spirit, even when we can't be together in body. Today we have music played by lovely Carly Schau, and we'd like to send a shout out to Rick Dusky for being our technology lead. Thank you. Couldn't do it without you. Okay, this is our new exploration. I have to redo the slideshow before I can do that. Now is time to light our chalice. And our chalice lighting words this morning. We light our chalice this morning in honor of the connections that make us stronger, both as individuals and as a community. The words we think on this morning are by Jennifer Grayson. We light this chalice, symbol of our purpose, to bring more love and justice into the world. We light this chalice knowing our congregation as a church dispersed across communities, not bound by walls, but connected through the web of life. And now we have a moment for announcements. So if you have an announcement, please come on forward, use one of the microphones so we all can hear you, or if you are online this morning, you can type your announcement into the chat and we'll all be able to hear you that way.
Hi, I'm Linda. I will be placing a order for giant cards. So if anybody wants to order giant cards through the fellowship, and remember that the fellowship gets 5% back on every dollar that you purchase of a giant card, just let me know. The other thing that, and thanks to Ruby for letting us know, not only is it good for groceries at Giant, you can buy wine at Giant, but you can also buy gas at Giant. So if you're up by the Giant up north of Pottstown and you need gas, you can use those Giant cards. So very versatile card. Let me know. Thanks.
Let's see. Okay, so I'm John. And we have some newcomers. Just understand, I think it's what 5% comes back to the fellowship from each purchase of a giant card, I believe. So it's the sub-story. So the geriatric crew was out yesterday working on leaves. They said, I think it'd be 70 to be here yesterday or something like that. But we were out there and we got rid of the leaves we saw. We talked to the trees and said, please don't drop any more until next year.
Good morning. This is just a reminder. Next week is the week that we set aside to decorate a Christmas tree here in the sanctuary. So plan to join us. It'll be right after church. You'll go in and grab your coffee and cookies and whatever, and we'll socially distance and decorate the tree.
Even in this time when technology is so vital in providing us with connection, it can still distract us from one another. So at this point, I would like to remind everyone to put your notifications on silent, and then take a moment, take a deep breath, rest your eyes, and listen to the sound of the chime. Our opening words this morning are by Laura Horton-Ludwig. For what shall we give thanks? The wheel of the year has turned again. Once more, Thanksgiving season has arrived. How shall we sing our song of gratitude now? For what shall we give thanks? For this moment? For friends near and far? For our breath? For love? For courage and clarity? For strength? For delight? For laughter? For beauty? For the tables round which we gather? For the food we enjoy with friends, seasoned with love and memory? For the sun and the moon and the stars and the sky? For the trees who have seen so much and still stand proud, stretching themselves to the sky? For the bright voices of children? For the wisdom of elders? For actions that bless the world? For hard work that makes a difference? For music and art and celebration? For generosity, for compassion, for endurance, for joy, for hope? For all these things, we give thanks as we worship together. And now Carly will play hymn number 343 from Singing the Living Tradition, A Fire Mist and a Plant. Now is the time in our service where we remind ourselves that we need one another to survive, and that bills don't stop even when the world slows down. So we are passing the baskets this morning, but if it's more comfortable for you, there's also a donation link on the website. We welcome you and the gifts that you bring to our fellowship, whether it is that you have to offer us our time or money or service. We thank you so much for your generosity. The offering that is given in generosity is received with loving gratitude. Thank you. And now it's time for a story. So whether you are young in body or in spirit, you are welcome to join us at the front of the sanctuary.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Miss Ruby, and Miss Justine will be helping me with the book today. And I heard that the topic of the service today was trees. And so I thought, what better story than the borax? It's a favorite in our house. So we're starting on this page. Go forward a few. There you go. In the interest of time, I had to cut some pages out, so please bear with us for that. way back in the days when the grass was still green, and the pond was still wet, and the clouds were still clean, and the song of the swami swans rang out in space, one morning I came to this glorious place, and I first saw the trees, the truffula trees, the bright-colored tops of the truffula trees, mile after mile in the fresh morning breeze. And under the trees, I saw brown barbaloots frisking about in their barbaloot suits as they played in the shade and ate truffle of fruits. From the ripulous pond came the comfortable sound of the humming fish humming while splashing around. But those trees, those truffula trees. All my life I've been searching for trees such as these. The touch of their tops was much softer than silk, and they had the sweet smell of fresh butterfly milk. I felt a great leaping of joy in my heart. I knew just what I'd do. I unloaded my cart. In no time at all, I had built a small shop. Then I chopped down a truffula tree with one chop. And with great skillful skill and with speedy speed, I took the soft tuft and I knitted a thread. The instant I finished, I heard a gazump. I looked, I saw something pop out of the stump. Pop out of the stump. Higher. Up where everyone can see you. Okay. I saw something pop out of the stump of the tree I chopped down. It was sort of a man. Describe him? That's hard. I don't know if I can. He was shortish and oldish and brownish and mossy, and he spoke with a voice that was sharpish and bossy. Mister, he said with a sawdusty sneeze, I am the Lorax. I speak for the trees. I speak for the trees have no tongues. And I'm asking you, sir, at the top of my lungs. He was very upset as he shouted and puffed. What's that thing you've made out of my truffula tuft? Look, Lorax, I said, there's no cause for alarm. I chopped just one tree. I am doing no harm. I'm being quite useful. This thing is a thneed. A thneed's a fine something that all people need. It's a shirt, it's a sock, it's a glove, it's a hat. But it has other uses, yes, far beyond that. You can use it for carpets, for pillows, for sheets, or curtains, or covers for bicycle seats. The Lorax said, Sir, you are crazy with greed. There's no one on earth who would buy that full need. But the very next minute, I proved he was wrong. For just at that minute, a chap came along and he thought that the thneed I had knitted was great. He happily bought it for $3.98. I laughed at the Lorax. You poor silly guy. You can never tell what some people will buy. I changed the words, I know. I repeat, cried the Lorax. I speak for the trees. I'm busy, I told him. Shut up, if you please. I rushed across the room and in no time at all built a radio phone and put in a quick call. I called all my brothers and uncles and aunts and said, listen here, here's a wonderful chance for the whole Wutzler family to get mighty rich. Get over here fast, take the road to North Nitch, turn left at Weehawken, sharp right at South Stitch. And in no time at all, in the factory they built, the whole Wutzler family was working full tilt. We were all knitting thneeds just as busy as beads to the sound of the chopping of truffle trees. What do you guys think it sounded like? Chop, 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 chop. Pages upside down. Then, oh, baby, oh. Then, oh, baby, oh. How my business did grow. Now chopping one tree at a time was too slow, so I quickly invented my super axe hacker, which whacked off 4 truffle trees at one smacker. We were making thneeds 4 times as fast as before, and that Lorax, he didn't show up anymore. Bye-bye. But the next week, he knocked on my new office door. He snapped, "I'm the Lorax who speaks for the trees, which you seem to be chopping as fast as you please. But I'm also in charge of the brown barbaloots who played in the shade in their barbaloot suits and happily lived eating truffle fruits. Now, thanks to your hacking my trees to the ground, there's not enough truffle fruit to go around, and my poor barbaloots are getting the crummies because they have gas and no food in their tummies. They love living here, but I can't let them stay. They'll have to find food, and I hope that they may. Good luck, boys," he cried, and then he sent them away. I, the once-ler, felt sad as I watched them all go, but business is business, and business must grow regardless of crummies and tummies, you know. Then again he came back. I was fixing some pipes when that old nuisance Lorax came back with more gripes. "I am the Lorax," he coughed and he whiffed. He sneezed and he snuffled. He snargled, he sniffed. "Once-ler," he cried with a cruffless croak. "Once-ler, you're making such smogulous smoke." My poor swami swans, why they can't sing a note. No one can sing with smog in his throat. "And so," said the Lorax, "please pardon my cough. They cannot live here, so I'm sending them off. Where will they go? I don't hopefully know. They may have to fly for a month or a year to escape from the smog you've smogged up around here." "You're glumping the pond where the humming fish hummed. No more can they hum, for their gills are all gummed. So I'm sending them off, for their future's dreary. They'll walk on their fins and get woefully weary in search of some water that isn't so smeary." And then I got mad. I got terribly mad, and I yelled at the Lorax, "Now, listen here, Dad. All you do is yap, yap, and say bad, 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 bad. Well, I have my rights, sir, and I'm telling you, I intend to go on doing just what I do. And for your information, you Lorax, I'm figuring on biggering and biggering and biggering and biggering, turning more truffle trees into thneeds, which everyone needs." And at that very moment, we heard a loud whack. From outside in the fields came a sickening smack of an axe on a tree. Then we heard the tree fall, the very last truffle tree of them all. No more trees, no more thneeds, no more work to be done. So in no time, my uncles and aunts, everyone, all waved me goodbye. They jumped into my car and drove away under the smoke-smuggled stars. Now all that was left near the bad-smelling sky was my big empty factory, the Lorax and I. And all that the Lorax left here in this mess was a small pile of rocks with the one word, unless. Whatever that meant, well, I just couldn't guess. But now, says the once-ler, now that you're here, the word of the Lorax seems perfectly clear, unless someone like you hears a whole awful lot. Nothing is going to get better. It's not. So, catch, says the once-ler. He lets something fall. It's a truffle seed. It's the last one of all. You're in charge of the last of the truffle seeds. And truffle trees are what everyone needs. Plant a new truffle, treat it with care. Give it clean water and feed it fresh air. Grow a forest, protect it from axes that hack. Then a Lorax and all of his friends may come back. The end. I feel bad every time you have to go through that, buddy. Thank you all.
No, we're not supposed to sing. Let's get rid of this. So in this time, when we're putting physical distance between ourselves and our neighbors and our coworkers and our friends, sometimes it feels difficult to connect with people. So but we're connecting this morning, so if there are things that are important to you, things that are happy or things that are sad or just things that you need to talk about, this is your chance. This is the time for joys and sorrows. If you're weighed down with sorrow or bursting with joy, please take a chance and come up and connect with us.
So I'm John. So I have three joys. One is I watched Justine and Ruby get up from the floor after kneeling. I was thrilled because I couldn't have done that. I would be still on the floor. That's part of my age. So that's good for them. Other times may come. The second is we have three relatively new people here today. That is part of the lifeblood of our congregation. We welcome you and honor your presence. Hope you will find a home with us spiritually, and tell others if you find this to be a place where you find what you're looking for. We believe we have a lot to give spiritually. The third is that Dr. Theodore Seuss Geisel, if we want to use his full name, was a graduate of my alma mater, Dartmouth, in I think 29 or 30 last century. He began his career working on a satirical magazine in the college called the Jack-O-Lantern, which still exists, and went on to his career first in advertising, actually, for which he was first famous, and then writing the books that we will treasure and revere. He was a pacifist. He's an anti-war advocate. Much like the old Scrooge McDuck cartoons, there's a hidden message, and if we listen and look carefully as we did today, one can see the message that he was trying to convey both to children in a humorous way and to adults in a more serious way. And just parenthetically, the nice thing is his wife, who lived beyond him, donated a fortune, and the Dartmouth Medical School has now been renamed the Geisel School of Medicine, so we thank him in so many ways.
So this morning we are thankful for the gifts of community that sustain and surround us. And we are thankful for the gifts of literature that help us to learn and entertain us and to think deeply about things. And we are thankful for people who can help us with all sorts of things by donating their time and their energy. So we are grateful this morning. Spirit of life and love, be with us today as we celebrate with one another and as we comfort one another. Let us take a moment to reflect on our joys and sorrows, both those spoken here this morning and those that are held silently in our hearts. And now Carly will play hymn number 328, I Sought the Woods in Summer. This is not one that we are all familiar with, but it's neat to get a chance to hear different tunes than we would normally hear. And I'm going to put the words up for you so that you can see what they wrote. Actually, if you get a chance to look at it in the actual book, there was one extra verse that I couldn't put on here that kind of ties everything together. I thought the woods in summer. Lost the cursor. There it is. Interconnected roots. So when I was about 12 years old, I did a research project for school. It was about the animal testing industry, the one that made sure that our shampoo and our mascara and the like was safe to use. And it was the 1980s, and let's just say that the results of my research did not make me happy. My Uncle Roger was a vegetarian, so I knew there was a way to survive without eating meat. And I told my mom that I wanted to try, and she said, well, all right, sure, but you have to read about it, you have to learn how to do it safely. And so I read a whole bunch of books. I read things like Diet for a Small Planet and the Moosewood Cookbook and a bunch of other ones. And in all my reading, I stumbled upon this book about plants, which I haven't been able to find again, that suggested that broccoli had a rudimentary nervous system and that I should be mentally warning my parents before I cut them up to peel them and eat them. Now, I may have been a kid, but I wasn't that gullible. I only mentally prepped up my carrots and broccoli twice before I decided that if other people can't hear my thoughts, Probably my broccoli and carrots didn't hear them either. In my high school environmental club, we put on a play of the Lorax, just like we did here this morning. We had the cool Dr. Seuss wigs, and we had Lorax t-shirts, and when the guy playing the Lorax jumped up declaring, "I am the Lorax, I speak for the trees, I speak for the trees where the trees have no tongues," it never occurred to me that trees were anything other than mute and enduring. They grow where they're planted, and life happens to them, or maybe just near them. And in the 2000s, I remember watching the TV show Mythbusters, where they proved that plants did not care about human language or understand English through this series of greenhouse experiments on the roof of their building. Because remember, we've all heard that, oh, if you talk to your plants, well then they're going to grow better. And you should say nice things to them because no one wants to hear terrible things all day. Well, this Mythbusters episode, they had 3 different groups of plants, and one group of plants heard nothing, actually 4, because one group of plants heard nothing but nice things on a radio loop, and another group of plants heard nothing but mean things, and another group heard nothing but classical music, and then the last group heard nothing but heavy metal. And guess which one grew best? It was the heavy metal, yeah, crazy, right? So I'm not sure that really proves anything other than that humans will believe anything they see on Mythbusters. But it established in my head that plants are passive. Now I say all this as background to my introduction to the work of Suzanne Simard. She is a professor of forest ecology at the University of British Columbia. And her new book, Finding the Mother Tree, Uncovering the Wisdom and Intelligence of the Forest, is part memoir and part overview of her career researching the interconnected lives of trees. Simard begins the book in much the same way that she begins her 2016 TED Talk, which some of you may have already seen, so this may not be news to you. She begins this with a memory. Growing up, Simard spent every summer on a houseboat in the Monashee Mountains of British Columbia. Her family was a family of loggers, and they cut down the trees by hand with big hand saws, the kind that take 2 people. They dragged them out of the forest using horses, and they dragged them down to the river where they could be floated down to the sawmills. And one morning, while she and her brother and sister were still in their pajamas, her Uncle Wilfred came running over, and they heard their grandfather cursing in French. Uncle Wilfred's beagle, Jigs, had just fallen into the outhouse. The dog was too far down in the hole. What was he doing? Like, how does a dog fall in the outhouse? But that's not the point. The dog was really far down in there, and the hole was too narrow to just hoist him out. So her grandfather, her father, and her 2 uncles were going to need to dig into the side of the hill so that they could get to the dog to drag him out the side of the hillside. So first her grandfather cleared the mushrooms, carefully saving the fruity-smelling chanterelles to eat later, and noting where the clusters of amaryllis indicated that the tree roots would be soft enough to break through. And then they started to dig. They dug through layers of forest, rotting needles and buds with their brightly colored fungal threads, a rich dark cocoa humus layer, an interwoven basket of gray and brown roots that were shot through with colorful fungi. They cut through a layer white as sand that was bleached by the rains. They cut into a layer so full of iron oxide that it looked like the earth was bleeding, and they cut through roots as big around as a person's forearm. Down past that, they cut into a layer strewn with rocks and boulders. And hours more work with crowbars and axes and spades, the tan earth became gray, and the hole was finally big enough that poor Jigs could be hoisted out. This memory of this layer cake of earth being slowly spread out, all the roots and the fungi and the rocks in the soil that allow the towering giants of the forest to arch their canopies so far above our heads, this memory was what inspired her to go into forestry. When Simard was in college, she had a work study with a logging company. Logging by this time was very different to the logging in her youth. The advent of trucks meant that loggers no longer had to evaluate the trees individually. So they could cut big trenches through the forest. They could take down whole swaths of forest all at once, a practice called clear cutting. Samard talks about the guilt she felt sentencing those giants of the forest, trees that had been alive during events that she could only read about in history books, sentencing them to die. But her job wasn't generally marking off the sections that needed to be cut. Her job was in replanting. Because people thought, well, it doesn't matter how many of these big trees we cut down, if we put them back, well, then we aren't doing any harm. Yes, our human belief in the regenerative powers of nature meant that we thought that just pressing those rows of seedlings straight into barren earth would be enough to make them grow. We thought that the even lines that pass for order in the human mind would make for orderly growth and orderly harvest later on. Did any of you ever read Madeleine L'Engle's A Wrinkle in Time? Do you remember that planet that was shadowed by it, with the order that was so unnatural? That's what that reminds me of, all the orderly rows being imposed on nature. So when Samard visited these little trees that were planted in those orderly rows, she found that they were all dying. Their little needles were yellow. Their little roots stifled in the gray, rocky soil. And as she left one plot of dying seedlings, she noticed that there was a tree that had germinated naturally that was just about the same age as those dying seedlings. But it was doing just fine. It was just outside the clear cutting, and it was underneath the canopy of some of the older trees. Unlike those human-planted seedlings that were pulled up easily from the soil, the natural seedling was holding tight to the earth it was growing in. And just like the roots of the trees in the outhouse, the healthy seedling's roots were covered with fungi. Those poor little dying seedlings, their roots were bare. Samard did not stay with the lumber company. She was actually just not asked to come back, although that was probably something to do with it being a male-dominated profession back when she was there. But it was a blessing in disguise, because what it meant was that she could focus on what she really wanted to answer. She wanted to answer questions. Her research was aimed at answering the question, why did those little seedlings that were planted by human hands in bare soil do so poorly, when the seedlings that were planted by nature were thriving? Because humans were thinking, well, if we get rid of everything else there, then those little seedlings, well, they are going to have all the resources all to themselves, and they should be able to grow bigger and stronger faster. But what Samard discovered is that that fungus that was coating the roots of the healthy trees was not just some sort of opportunistic growth or parasite or disease, but an essential helper for the trees. Samard discovered that trees are connected by something called a mycorrhizal network, a network of fungi that connect the trees in the forest to one another, allowing them to share resources such as carbon and minerals and water. As Samard says, plants are obligate mutualists with fungi. Samard has an ongoing study. It's still going on today, even. It's called the Mother Tree Project. It started in 2016 with 24 little patches of forest across 9 climate regions in British Columbia. And these little patches of forest are treated in different ways. Some of them are clear cut, and some of them have selective felling, like the tree harvesting of her youth. And her team is tracking the forest regeneration and the forest biodiversity, and how much carbon is being stored, and the productivity, how much wood can be taken out. The preliminary data indicate that the older trees actually protect and nurture the younger trees. through that mycorrhizal network by, for example, offering them water and nutrients on dry days. So the roots of the little trees can only get so far down, but those mother tree roots, they can get all the way down into the groundwater, and that's what she means by like sharing water on dry days. A single mother tree can be connected to over 40 other trees, including saplings and other mother trees, with the oldest trees having the most connections. So my kids learned about the mycorrhizal network not by reading this book, but by watching the Magic School Bus rides again. The episode is Tim and the Talking Trees from 2018, if you're curious and wanted to watch it. I remember being amazed that trees could have such sophisticated communication, and also thinking that maybe the Magic School Bus was like exaggerating for effect so kids would think it was super cool. But it turns out that they actually were not exaggerating. Trees can communicate. They communicate about insects and diseases. They share water and nutrients. And when they're dying, they send out their resources to their family and friends to help their family and friends live on. So if you've ever been on a walk through a forest and you've seen a little sapling and it's like really, really small and there's all these big trees above with big canopies and you wonder, how is that sapling even getting enough light to grow? The answer might be, it's not. Just like we humans work as a community to support our children until they can support themselves, trees shuttle nutrient to saplings until they are able to reach the sunlight and provide for themselves. Now, this sounds like we're hypothesizing a family group structure or community structure in trees. You are correct. Peer-reviewed scientific studies support evidence that kin recognition occurs in conifers. So SMART collaborated with Susan Dudley at McMaster University, and they did an experiment where they had 3 trees that were growing together. They had them in a little pot in a greenhouse. And although all 3 trees would be the same species, 2 were related, a parent and a child. Actually, they were usually like really close in age. But one wasn't related to them at all. And they found that the trees that were related to each other in this little tiny 3-tree planting, the trees that were related were much more likely to exchange minerals and water and nutrients than the trees that were not related. And it's not just Simard's work that shows that trees communicate. For example, a study of acacia trees in Africa showed that when one acacia tree starts releasing bitter tannins in its leaves because it's being eaten by a hungry giraffe, all the other trees in the area also start releasing those tannins even though there's no giraffe eating them yet. Richard Grant's 2018 article in Smithsonian Magazine, Do Trees Talk to Each Other?, is an interview with another advocate for the ideas that trees can communicate. This advocate is the controversial German forester Peter Wohlleben. In his book, The Hidden Life of Trees, Wohlleben anthropomorphizes trees to the extent that he is dismissed by other scientists. However, his book isn't really aimed at scientists. His book is aimed at average people, and his metaphors are meant to help people to care about the forest and about the trees. So Wohlleben, he manages a forest in Eifel, Germany, and one of the trees that he's really famous for pointing out is this beech stump. It is, about 4 or 5 feet across, and it was felled, they estimate 400 or 500 years ago, so it is old. But the stump is still green with chlorophyll, despite it having no trunk or leaves or anything to keep it alive. It's being supported by the surrounding trees through the mycorrhizal network. Wohlleben likes to say that even the trees do not want to abandon their dead. But if it's still getting chlorophyll, it's not exactly dead. So what I think of it as is more a circle of life familiar to a lot of us. The young are supported by the old until the old need to be supported by the young. Wolven also likes to compare trees to elephants. And we all like elephants. Unlike trees, we find it really easy to empathize with elephants. They have adorable, big-eared babies, and their babies use their trunks just like we use hands, and they hold onto their mom's tail just like we hold hands. It's really cute. You know, elephants, they used to have a really strong culture. They had females that lived in matriarchal herds, and they had males that lived in bachelor herds, and they had really long migration routes, and their migration routes would include visits to graveyards to honor their dead. And we humans interfered with the elephants, and now they are dying. About 90% of the wild elephants in Africa have been wiped out by humans. And elephants need each other in order to survive. There's actually, this is a digression, but I'm going to tell you anyhow. There's actually this condition that really young male elephants can get that can't be cured unless there is an older male elephant to knock them out of it. Like the older male elephant's presence, mere presence, will knock them out of this condition that they get. And that used to happen easily in bachelor herds. But now elephant herds are so small and so widely scattered that sometimes we have to euthanize the young male elephants because of this condition that they can have, where if there was just an older elephant, it wouldn't happen at all. End of digression. So at one point, it was considered unscientific to acknowledge that animals feel pain. It was considered unscientific to acknowledge that animals might form relationships. At one point, it was the same people who might love their family dog would never be willing to entertain the thought that their family dog might love them back. So are we on the same precipice with plants? Plants are so different from us. They're rooted instead of mobile. They're hard instead of soft. They're quiet instead of noisy. We have a tough time feeling empathy for them. We can destroy trees without feeling too much guilt. We can uproot them to clear land for our houses, and then build those houses out of their bones. The situation in the forest today is just about as dire as the situation for the elephants. Trees are disappearing faster than they're growing due to the changes in our climate, due to humans taking down trees for our own uses, due to humans just clearing land because we don't want trees there at all. Simard's Finding the Mother Tree was set in Western Canada, and that kind of makes the problem of deforestation seem far away. Well, one of the things that Simard said in her 2016 TED Talk was that Canada has more deforestation than Brazil. And we think of Brazil as being a place where the rainforest is going at a rate that is just irreplaceable. In a 2021 interview with the Smoky Wire, Simard reminds us that there's only about 3% of the old-growth forests left in British Columbia. Oh, but that's a Canada problem, right? And Brazil problem, sure. Well, you know, a 2009 Scientific American article said that in the US, we don't even know how much old-growth forest we have left. No one agrees on what old growth means. However, the National Commission on Science for Sustainable Forestry showed that the Pacific Northwest has about 6% left, and we here in the Northeast, about 1%. So I've read history books that say that when Pennswood, because that's what Pennsylvania means, Penn's Woods, when Pennsylvania was first settled, a squirrel could travel from the shore of the Delaware River all the way to the headwaters of the Ohio without ever touching the ground. I mean, that might be a little bit of an exaggeration, but can you think about that? How amazing that must have been? That's not what you see today. In a 2016 Yale 360 interview with Diane Toomey, Suzanne Simard explained, "A forest is a cooperative system. To me, using the language of communication made more sense because we were looking at not just resource transfers, but things like defense signaling and kin recognition signaling. She goes on to say, we as human beings can relate to this better. If we can relate to it, we're going to care about it more. And if we care about it more, we're going to do a better job of stewarding our landscapes. So I don't know about you, but the landscape around my own house is mostly a study in benign neglect. However, I kind of wonder now if the trees in my yard are lonely when I finally get around to uprooting or mowing over their seedlings year after year. I wonder if my trees can recognize the footsteps of me and my family, just like I recognize the pattern of their branches overhead. And I'm not very good at keeping houseplants alive either, and I've always been able to casually joke about my black thumb. But how awful is it when I think about it that I've been consigning a living individual to a lonely pot indoors where it can communicate with no one and where its water and light may be too much or not enough, and no one can hear it needing help. I think about my commitment to respect the interdependent web of life of which we are all a part. When did we decide that grass is more beautiful than trees? Or that the mushrooms that appear suddenly in our lawn after a rainstorm are a problem instead of a miracle? Samard says on page 161 of Finding the Mother Tree, roots didn't thrive when they grew alone. The trees needed one another. We think of nature as survival of the fittest, but as studies of our own species prove, cooperation, collaboration, and community always win out over individualism. And when you think about the way we use the word roots in English, it makes it sound as if we knew this all along. Your roots? Well, that's where you come from. Your roots? That's your kin, your family. When you're putting down roots, you're planting yourself in one place, a place where you can grow and form connections and be part of a community. Our roots connect us to one another, whether we're the same or different. We need one another to survive. So as I end today, I have a wish for us. May we form communities that are as vibrant and diverse as a forest. May we cherish and nurture this beautiful planet we call home. And may we always allow the great spirit of love and compassion to teach us and show us the way. And now, we have one of my very favorite hymns, and actually this is also one of my mother's very favorite hymns, which is why I always think of her when I play it, For the Beauty of the Earth. Now the time has come to extinguish our chalice, and we'll extinguish the chalice with the words of Maddie Sapantis. We can all speak together if we'd like. We extinguish our chalice flame, but we keep its light in our hearts with its message of love and justice, taking it outside these walls to the world we live in, and to until we are together again. Thank you, Alan. And our closing words this morning are by Norman B. Mailer. Let our eyes and minds turn now toward the ordinary. Leaving this space made sacred by our presence, take with you at least some seed of understanding, hope, and courage, and drop it into the confusion of the world. Nourish that seed that it might grow as a tree of life, giving shelter to the weary and hope to the despairing. Be yourself a branch to the tree of life. And that, I believe, ends for the morning. So, amen, blessed be, shalom, salam, and thank you for joining us today. Please stay for coffee hour.